Thank you. I'm going to go now into our plenary. There will be more time for questions in a little bit. So, could I now ask our panel to join us on stage? So, if I can introduce them as they come up. I don't know what order they want to come up in, but shall we start? Can I first start? Can you please welcome Aine Morrison, who is the Chief Social Worker in Northern Ireland. Iona, Colvin, who you all know from Scotland. Lynn Romeo, who is obviously you've already met, who was the ex-Chief Social Worker in England. Aine Radulescu, who is the outgoing President of IFSW Europe. Trisha McCulloch is coming up. John McGowan from the Social Workers Union, and Jonathan Griffiths. Jonathan Griffiths, who is from the Office of the Chief Social Care Officer in Wales, and who is very delighted to be here today, who works closely with Albert Aine, who is the Chief Social Care Officer in Wales. And I'm going to have some discussion here, some questions that we've pre-prepared, but also some reactions to what you've heard. And I'd like to start actually with our three representatives from Northern Ireland, Scotland and Wales, just to get some kind of nation reflections on some of what you've heard from Lynn and her take on her years in England, and what you've heard also from Trisha. And can I come to you first, Iona? Would that be okay?
Yeah, so I thought, can you hear me okay?
Yes, yeah? Sure,
okay, I thought Trisha's presentation was really great. I think it's really fascinating, and there's some really tricky issues in there, I think, for us, particularly that professional identity, competence, and how we practice in multidisciplinary environments, for me, is probably one of the big challenges. But I guess I feel, in a sense, I recognised everything you said. So in Scotland for the last, it feels like forever, but it's probably 2 years or so, we've been working in the Scottish Government on a proposal for, well, it's in legislation. The legislation's gone through stage 1 in Parliament, a National Care Service. And as part of the National Care Service, we proposed to establish a National Social Work Agency. And the reasons that Trish put up, the slide that Trish put up, which said the struggle, are exactly the reasons we are proposing to establish a National Social Work Agency, which looks at the vision, the leadership, the political commitment, and our ministers are committed to this, but also looks at how we translate policy into practice. How do we make sure that when governments make policy, we have a workforce that can actually deliver, that's properly trained, that newly qualified social workers are supported and cared for and nurtured, that social workers there who've been there a longer time have an advanced practice framework that they can work into, and that we support the implementation. So I think it's really fascinating, and I will be quizzing Trish more, but I think it's absolutely the reason why we're proposing a National Social Work Agency in Scotland.
Thank you. Thanks very much, Iona. Could I come to you, Anya? Some reflections.
Sure, and thanks very much to Lynn and Trish for the presentations. I mean, like Iona, I recognised a lot of it, and I particularly like the concept of strength and struggle, and in a sense that very much speaks to me about my own social work practice, but also in terms of the role that I have now. So we are embarked upon a pretty major social work workforce reform programme, which encompasses many different aspects, and working our way through that. And even in that work, there's the two paths. One is about trying to address the struggle of capacity issues, lack of workforce, heavy caseload, stress. But the other end, and I suppose sometimes when I speak about this, I think people get a little nervous that I'm complacent about the state of the workforce. But despite that, and in full recognition that those are major problems, I do still see an awful lot of strengths in social work practice in Northern Ireland, and so I suppose the other pathway within our workforce reform is about the strengthening of practice, celebration of practice, strengthening social work identity. So yeah, those two strands made a lot of sense, and you know, we are working at the minute on a sort of specific guidance for supporting social workers, very specifically sitting underneath a kind of wellbeing strategy for all the health and social care workforce in Northern Ireland, but sort of further developing that into understanding the impact of the type of work we do and how we support people well. So I will also be coming to talk to Trish as well.
I think Trish is going to get a lot of emails and phone calls. Jonathan, can I come to you and say a little bit about what's happening in Wales and your reactions to what you've heard so far this morning?
Good morning. Thank you for the opportunity to be here. Just in terms of the response to Trish's piece around worthwhile work, I think I'm really pleased to announce that in Wales, the National Care and Support Office has just been launched. That was in April. And we'll oversee within that office, I guess, more of a consistent approach to both practice and our engagement with citizens across the country, particularly trying to bring forward consistency in commissioning. And we're looking equally at transforming children's services, in particular at this moment, and looking at a national practice framework. So we're engaging with the workforce currently around how that practice framework would work and how people can engage in that process. And I think that, for me, that final slide you put up around worthwhile work and how it was politically recognised, I see, and I'm positive about that national office engagement with the sector at this moment in time. At the same juncture, we're resetting a workforce strategy and engaging with the social work practitioners across Wales. I think the issue that was also mentioned there was very much around consistency. When have we ever got to a position that things are totally consistent? Because actually when you try to create consistency in a system, you often get a feeling that actually we need to create localism as well as consistency. So it's an interesting balance to be had there. But I think progress to be made by bringing the sector to the fore of the political ambition for Wales.
Thank you. I'd just like to pick up a little bit. Lynn, I thought I might come to you because you were talking about what sustained you in your practice over those years, and this focus on what motivates new social workers, and I wonder whether you were recognising that, looking back over your career, and also the work that you've done as a chief social worker in supporting new people to come into the profession. There's anything from what Tricia was saying about strengths and struggles that you recognise?
I think it's a brilliant presentation, actually, fantastic. I think it really captured it, and I think it's always been so like that. I think it's probably much harder now than ever before because of certainly in England, because of the complex environment of having, two departments trying to be responsible for social work and social work practice, the struggles with local authorities, funding, so the kind of moral injury that often social workers face when they're trying to, whether they're in children's services or adult services, or as we have many, many more social workers now working in health settings, mental health trusts and acute hospitals. So the NHS are directly employing social workers to be social workers, not necessarily undertaking statutory roles. So it's quite a complex landscape, and those interfaces of trying to get the person at the heart of what's happening and ensuring the best thing happens, it is a real struggle, and people do get very demoralised. But I think the work that's happened around really promoting professional practice, having principal social workers located in all the key organisations to provide a practice-led, professionally-led, relationships-based approach rather than a process, a gatekeeping, kind of keeping people out rather than giving people an opportunity to get what they need. I think that's the main thing that's really changed the narrative. And I also wanted to recognise, I think, together as a sector, as social workers across all these, in BASW, in local authorities, in the health sector, in research, in academics, the teachers in our universities, that focus on trying to have that changed narrative, I think, since I've been in post and just left, has really shifted. The dial's really changed. When I first came in, it was in the wake of the baby Peter Connolly scandal, all the terrible child protection issues that had arisen, the absolute castigation of the profession as though we were individually responsible for all the terrible things that are happening. That has really shifted, and I think that appreciation of how important it is to invest in social work, to recognise, it's not a long, long way to go, but to position social work and practice and supporting social workers. And we've done some work, I know it's not perfect, on trying to get more placement opportunities for students in statutory settings. Still a big challenge. We do need more people with more time to do good work. But I think there has been a big shift, and I think that has... I always find social work students I speak to very enthusiastic and very committed and very much wanting to get out there and do the job. And of course, the environment we put them in is so important, as your research showed. You know, if you haven't got a good supervisor, you haven't got a good culture, it's not going to work.
Yeah. So perhaps we can come back to that transition into practice. Maybe the panel could have a think about that, and also whether we have moved things forward quite significantly, because I think there have been some changes. I'd like to come to John now to pick up on some of these themes, and also to think about, you know, if you've got what your SWU, Social Workers Union, is hugely involved in thinking about what changes are needed to improve working conditions, the context of practice, let's call it that. It's wider perhaps than some people think about when they hear working conditions. It's the whole context of practice, working for practice. Any priorities that you'd like to pull out from what you've heard and for SWU in terms of shifting the dial on that, and what can change to improve that for social workers, make it more sustainable?
There's a big question.
Sorry, I went on, didn't it? Yeah, I know, it's a big question. We work on this together, John, so we work shoulder to shoulder on this.
So before I get started, I promise not to be political, but what a disgraceful and terrible government we've had, and we've all got the opportunity to throw them out. So clap if you agree that. I'm also aware from my own networks that there's several Labour candidates for MPs will be watching us online. So, you know, you're on our watch if you get through. I know there was only one we mentioned is social care, but be careful with social workers. So, anyway, I had an early start this morning. I was in a social work office at 8 o'clock this morning meeting a team leader not far from here about another matter. And I was saying, why are you not coming to the conference? And he looked at me and said, John, get real. How can I take time off? How can I come to this conference? And I think that's something we've all got to address. How can the working social worker attend an event like this when there's huge caseloads? So I want you to reflect on that. Now, I'm going to take you through a journey. I'm going to start with some negativity, so stay with me, then I'll come to some positivity. So my journey starts really, and I can reflect on my own. I've been in social work for nearly 30 years, and before then my own parents were foster carers, so I've got a good sort of landscape and understanding. But reflecting on the 30 years, I think it's important to realise what we've lost in social work. And it's not been under my watch as a social workers union. I think we have to realise what we've actually lost as a profession. We've lost our pay. The pay has not increased, as we all know, appropriately. We've also lost basic working conditions and allowances. And I think we can all reflect on things like mileage. It's been capped for years. Caseloads, they've increased, and the complexity and less preventative work. Staff parking. In the old days, we'd have a parking space and we would have a badge and we'd park our cars. Car allowances, that was a thing in the past. You actually got money for using your car and everything else. Poor modern offices. I was in the social work office at 8 o'clock and they had wee glass boxes I met in. And I'm thinking, this is a great working environment, this, stuck in a box in the middle of nowhere. Anyway, so we've lost support services, all the services we used to engage with in the third sector and all the other agencies we used to refer to in social work. We've lost all our special allowances. I remember some local authorities paying for practice teaching, MHO allowances, and there was good incentives there. Some local authorities still have it, actually. And really, and finally, some of the negativity is the general respect in our society for social work. And I know our union, along with BASW, was doing a lot of media work, but we've got a long way to go to represent our profession. So that's some negativity for you, but it's not all doom and gloom, because we're all part of a wonderful profession, aren't we? I mean, I got into social work because I thought I could promote change, and we could make a difference. And really, if you're not in social work for that, you're certainly not in it for the, for the money either. So I think we could all flourish as practitioners and really move on there. But you may be asking me sitting here, well, that's okay, you're saying that, John, but how do we do this? And I think it's important to listen to social workers, because we can all meet policymakers. I've met so many parliamentaries. We can all meet professional associations and unions. But I think we need to listen to the voice, the day in and day out working frontline social worker where the matters are arising. And I know what it's like on the front line. And again, before I come on to some of the positives, I'm going to finish on some positives. I think we've all got a duty to join the professional association. I'm always astonished that folk leave university and they, oh, well, I'm thinking of joining BASW. Now, obviously, I want you to join SWU, and there's other unions, but I'm always astonished that, why have you not joined a trade union? So I guess that's something to reflect on. Now, let's look at some positivity now. We've been running, I've been running a working conditions campaign for a long time along with BASW, and some good research as well, covering 8 years. But we're hopefully going to be launching a new engagement strategy. But it's not just research, we're looking to try to change the landscape of social work, but we need everyone on board. Don't just sit back and thinking, well, actually we need to do this, we do this. We need you on board, and we need you to tell all your colleagues and friends to join the professional association, maybe our union, and also get active. So there's maybe 5 key areas we want to look on. We want to improve social work and workforce well-being. That's a gimme, isn't it? So we want to improve workplace and employer support and practices. We want to support social workers to influence effective change. And we want to increase funding to social work, particularly around funding for social work students, which is a massive, a complex landscape. It really is, and we've been active on that. And I'm a great believer that if we're in the forefront of working with social work students, when you leave the profession, we'll do well. And finally, we want to encourage all social workers to join the professional association and hopefully my union. So thank you.
Thank you, John. Thank you. So there's much to do, and there is a sense of things that we've lost, but also perhaps some things that we've gained. There's been some changes. The question is, how do we make this a reality for social workers in practice everywhere? And there may be something about how we really build on the better practice, the best practice, the good employer. Why? I mean, any reflections actually from, perhaps again from those of you who are from the Four Nations, about why do we get great practice in one area to support social work, and then other areas just don't. It doesn't spread. It's too difficult in some areas, but seems possible in others. Any just thoughts on that? I'm going to come to Iona just briefly, just because you're putting a face like it's an awful question, which might mean that you've got a great answer, or it might mean you have no answer. It's a kind of struggle of leadership around this.
Yeah, it's the question most often asked by Scottish ministers, I have to say, and the answer is I don't know. I mean, basically, the variation in practice is, it's very noticeable, and it sits side by side. And having been, I mean, I was the director of social work, director of health and social care. I worked in Ayrshire, where there's 3 different authorities sitting side by side, and never at any point did all 3 of us agree. Usually there was 2 of us agreed and 1 didn't. So it's a difficult thing, but I think it's the thing that we really need to tackle is to look at the best practice, to encourage and to look at how we spread the best practice. Because we spend a lot of time examining the problem, we really need to find the solution. So for me, it's one of the really difficult things, because it's just that sometimes people hold hard to their beliefs that the way they're doing it is right, or else, frankly, sometimes they don't care that much. So I think there's an issue there about how we encourage that dissonance and questioning, and how we actually try and raise them all up to the best standard.
Yeah. Thanks, Iona. Jonathan.
Yeah, I wanted to offer a response from a Welsh context. We're currently got the Welsh Local Government Association and Social Care Wales completing a report around a national set of terms and conditions for social work in Wales. So that'll be an interesting report to look at as to whether you can create a consistent, again, landscape in the reward side of the business. That's one area. I think your point ultimately about how you create that consistency has to be about how we work with leaders and how we get that consistency in leadership and culture across organisations. And I don't think unless you get that in balance, it's very difficult to create the consistent terms you want. And just another thing from Wales, because obviously giving that context, I mentioned the office earlier, but we have brought a best practice forum into place for, again, to tackle that issue about how we apply best practice, how we adopt that across the country. So it's bringing practitioners and others into that fora with all of the directors of social services and asking that simple question: why can you not apply this approach and this practice in your local authority, in your area? What stops it? What are the barriers?
I'm just going to make a quick comment on something that Tricia, you talked about, which was about, I'm going to use the word dreaming. You were using visioning around the utopian possibilities and the fact that we need to be brave enough, I think, to think big ideas. And if you don't use your imagination about the future, you can't create different futures. And I think one of the things that strikes me is that so often thinking about change, the discourse about change in social work is we say the same things quite a lot. We say them around and round in circles. And they may be great ideas in the sense, but maybe they're not the new ideas that are needed. Maybe we need more imagination and more ideas and more different ways of thinking to bring about some of the change. So I'm just going to leave that there for a moment. I'm going to come back to you in a moment, Tricia, but I would like to go to Anna, who's been waiting patiently in the middle. Because just like Anna, you've been working with social work associations and social workers across the whole of Europe and beyond, actually, for a long time. And I wondered what you think, some reflections on the different ways in which, in different countries, the social work profession is being supported and developed and sustained, and some reflections on that. Because we're always loving the opportunity to learn from what happens elsewhere. So a few reflections on that would be welcome.
Thank you very much. Thank you. It's really a privilege. Yesterday I learned a lot from you. And this was the most beautiful way to see a song translated in the sign language. I've never seen before, so thank you so much. Really wonderful song in your... Yes, you know, I think we don't have another profession that is changing and adapting so much as social work profession. It's the speed of the world we are living. We have to keep this speed. And if you look to the narrative of how social workers are talking about social work in different countries, so different level and topics, and I think if we would like to have sustainable social work profession, we have to reduce the time, the element of the system that compose the social work profession are disconnected. And the element of our profession are, first of all, practice, research, and education. And then all over is the difference between countries. So as I work in the disaster management, in practice, we are in the situation that we have to build, and you here discuss about struggling and challenges, but also about, Lynn said, how inspiring models social workers are building in the reality without having any kind of information coming from theory or research. And as we know, the impact of change is taking some time. And then research is coming later on, looking to what social workers did and also what we have as an impact of change. And then the research has to transfer this in an understanding model for practitioners, and then is bringing to education. But it's going back to practice. And then practitioners, they have another challenge. They have to change what they did, because they now are informed by theory. And this is somehow disconnected in time. And then yesterday, for example, I post on social media some reflective question from here, and the social worker from Denmark said, "Oh, Anna, we wrote a book about." And I was very good, interesting, and she posted also the link to the research and book they wrote in Denmark about social action and green actions. So then we have this need to meet with our colleagues from other countries and see where is this narrative in each country. And this is a challenge, because now we have to speak the same language. And the same language is, in fact, English language. And, you know, as I work with Armenia and Azerbaijan and Israel and countries from East European area, we don't have words in our language. We don't have words to have the same meaning like English. Therefore, as it is difficult to create words, we use English words. That's why social work language is composed by our language as well as English. And we don't, for example, in my language, I don't have a translation of feedback meaning. Yeah? So then we need to meet international, and I listen to you, John, how important it is to meet with social workers and then find a common language to go back to practitioners and say, look, this is what is happening in different corners. So yes, it is challenging, and I think the way to get together is a word, and also, for example, for practitioners, that's why we look so much to practice, because they have to build from what they have, ethic principles, of course, and it's not easy to create this best practice model. That's why, for example, it's so important in practice to have this co-production, co-design, responsiveness of services. And IFSW Europe start these two important projects, EU project with the university and research and practitioners about how we connect research and practice and how we create responsiveness services in order to help practitioners. And also in this course, we introduced the new social workers being there, because, you know, I hear a lot about generation, connection, but in practice, there is nothing like this. We have multiple generation buildings together, because we don't have anything to teach about green social work, the generation coming. In fact, we are building together. And disaster management, we are building the generation we are building together. It's nothing that I can teach my students or I can teach the new social workers. So I think sustainable profession is if we are building all social workers together on the earth. And this is a challenge for all of us. But I learned from you a lot. And you have such a different research and such a different way to look to things, which I will bring, of course, to other countries and social workers. But it's such an inspiring profession, really. And having this speed with the earth, it's also something that we all, you said, we like challenges. Yes, we have a lot. Thank you.
Anna, thank you. Thank you so much. So we are, I think I was picking there that we are inventing social work through practice. We research it afterwards, and then we have to learn again. And it's an interesting point, because many other professions actually they do the same, but they have more of an intention to do the research first and then to practice. Whereas we have a tendency to be, because we're adaptable, we are creating practices and we are responding to the needs that are before us, and then we research. And so how do we integrate the research and the practice is really important, I think, for the sustainability of the profession. It's so important. But thank you for the reflections, and thank you for enjoying the conference. And the use of language, a whole other thing. We'll have another conference about how we learn across nations through different languages and what we learn from the rest of the world, because sometimes UK we don't think like that. but we must. So I would like to, before we get to some questions...
I said, be careful to the words you are creating, because we are taking this word. Thank you.
Did you hear that, everybody? Yeah. The words we create in English are very powerful across the world, and it's a responsibility. I'm going to take some questions from the floor in just a moment, but I would just like to ask the whole panel, if possible, or any of you who'd like to comment, just on how we might integrate some of the ideas that we had yesterday, which was focused particularly on eco-social practices, the environment, the physical and climate and natural environment that we're living in, and the changes that are happening there, and the implications of that for social work. And I think it would be nice just to hear just a few reflections about what does that mean for the future of the profession, because how do we integrate sustainability of workforce, sustainability of people, looking after our people better, with looking after the environment that we're living in? I wonder if anybody would like to say something about that. Lynn?
Yeah, I think that's a really good point. And I was reflecting again on my time, and I think sometimes it's been invisible, actually, the work we've done. And I remember working with some older people to think about how we would re-provide care and support for them, starting with what it needed to look and feel like for them, and using architects and ecologists in the local area to build something that would have the right nature provision for them, green spaces, wandering gardens, the right sort of feel inside. So I think it's been on the margins, but in a way that's where we need to position ourselves more strongly. You know, what looks and feel, how should this look and feel for people? How do you create an environment that is the best it can be in terms of access to green space, to peace, to a kind of a harmonious environment, but also work towards having low carbon emissions in the buildings you have, or how you move people around to go to particular resource centres. And a social work student I had at the time did this amazing piece of research on looking at using geographical information systems to reduce the amount of time people would have to travel. So all those things, I think, need to be part of our repertoire when we're working both at a commissioning, planning, working with people who are going to draw on care and support, and also thinking about them.
So it opens up our opportunity to think about what can be offered, what should change and what can change. Any other thoughts on John?
Yeah, no, I think it goes back to my earlier points. I think you can achieve change, but don't wait for others to do that. So there's opportunities to be active and to promote change. And we can achieve social change, but I think sometimes folks sit back and be led. But there's also the complexity about having the time to do that. So we need to make it exciting. I use the word exciting to engage, because if not, it's just another meeting for folk to attend. If you want to have any idea how to create a great campaign, there's a campaign action pack that we created along with BASW in the austerity group. So you can download that, and it's like 70 odd pages. How do you create a campaign? How do you get active? How do you raise issues? How do you write to MPs? How do you write to the media? And I think by using that grassroots support, you can build that up. But yes, on a holistic way, we can all achieve change. But on the micro way, I think we're all responsible to be active.
Anya?
Yeah, so I'll be very blunt in saying that I hadn't really thought about it up until yesterday, in terms of what that what that link was, and I suppose I have thought about it since, and in some ways I do struggle to see, to see very sort of obvious links, but I do think there's something there about our practice in relation to poverty, inequality. I was at Colin and Jane's presentation on community development yesterday, and talking very much about poor housing, who's impacted the most by rising prices of food, and I suppose the other thing that struck me as well from yesterday's presentation was very much about the role of climate change in sort of immigration. From the global south to the global north. And clearly that's an area of social work practice, both in terms of welcoming people but understanding their needs. And again, it talks very much to the sort of global inequality issues that we have. And you know, in terms of a social work, social justice approach, that is absolutely where we should be. And I'm way off to think about it some more now.
Thank you, and thank you for that honesty, because I think that's where so many people are, right? That's the reality, is how do we make this relevant? Yeah, Anna, and then we're going to go to questions.
Thank you. If we look to practice, we see that more and more we move to building caring communities. And resources, as we are using a lot of resources from communities, we are getting easily to social action, green social work. I work a lot in Ukraine, as many of you know, and for example, there we do not have a lot of resources, and it's more and more difficult to bring resources crossing the border. And we had to look to the community resource, and of course we are looking to food and creating food, and we are creating farms around social services to be able to ensure that people are having the necessary food every day. And I think practice is giving us this, these models and this chance to understand how we can integrate without going from theory to practice, but the other way around,
practice
looking to practice. Yes.
Thank you, Anna. It's an inspirational project there that you've worked on.
Yeah, IFSW is really doing great work in Ukraine.
Thank you. Okay, let's go to the floor and let's see what questions we have. And we also have some questions online. So does anybody here want to... Yes, there's a question here. Thank you. Yes, of course. Sorry.
So that's really fantastic presentation, very, very interesting, thank you. I'm a newly qualified social worker myself, just for nearly a year now, and I'm deaf, completely deaf, and I work in a hearing environment, and I understand that can be really a struggle, but there's no other deaf social workers who work in a hearing environment. It's the first time it's happened, it's completely new, and I've got a question for Anna. You're working in... Do you have deaf social workers? Has there been any research about deaf social workers? Anything?
We do have social workers, but I did not find research that could help us, for example, deal with the situation we had with Ukraine during this time. And in my country, I could not find social workers to help the community, the deaf community, traveling.
The deaf community.
Yes, so I could not find research. So again, we would need data. And yesterday I heard a lot of people presenting that we need data that is informing practice. We would need that, yes.
So I think the integration of the full support and the full integration of social workers with disabilities, which is actually in the UK we know is a high number of people who have a declared disability, I think remains an issue. There were some stats in one of the workshops I was in about the how few social workers with disabilities are in leadership roles, for instance. So that meant I don't think internationally there's any more information that we're aware of, unless others know that.
But I have students in social work that are deaf, and they are working with me for their thesis. Yeah. And I do not have, I start to learn the language because I need to help them. And that's why they teach me how to talk to them in order that we are able to work together. And we have a common way of understanding each other. And I think we should have this more in research.
Thank you. So part of sustainability is about inclusiveness. Inclusiveness and sustainability absolutely go together, and that's something we can further talk about. So we have a lady there, and then Lewis here, and then I have a question online. So if we could take the comments or questions quite together, take each of them, and then we'll come back to the panel. We're running short of time, unfortunately, but... Yeah.
Thank you. I'll try and keep it brief. It's just to follow on from something that John said, actually, about engaging social workers. And I'm wondering if the panel has any views as to how we can reach out to social workers in practice to talk about retention. And the reason I ask is, I've, over the last 3 years, I've been delivering a course to social workers about staying in social work. Yeah. And the fundamental issue that they raise is that they feel so disconnected for a number of different reasons, but they are disconnected from social work. How do we reach out to them? How can we actively reach out and engage them in those discussions?
Thank you. So panel, have a think about reconnecting social workers who we might be wanting to keep or we might be wanting to bring back in. And Lewis.
Yeah, hello. Lewis Roberts. I'm a social worker in the northeast of England. For me, I was struck by the concept of worthwhile work and thinking about, you know, is my work worthwhile? Do I feel held and honoured? And I think one of the ways I've felt that my work is worthwhile is by increasing my interest with working alongside people who access social work services, those with lived experience of social work. I'm just interested, really. We haven't heard about that from the panel. So for me, there's something about how do we support people with experience of social work services to be embedded within statutory social work, for example, and making sure that their voices are front and centre in terms of our social work practice, in terms of our policy making, in terms of how we make decisions about people's lives. So it's just some reflections around that.
Thank you. Thanks. Thank you very much, Liz. So if I just take those two questions, there was a question there about can we reach out more to social workers, and Trish, you might have some thoughts on this, about how we reach social workers, keep social workers, make sure they are engaged. If we're finding that actually people become disengaged, what do we do to try and keep them?
Yeah, I guess there's so many different ways we can approach it, and I'm going to kind of stick with what I was talking about. And I think for me, one of the things that's come out really clearly is the importance of strengthening this notion of practice and what practice is, and ensuring that social workers in organisations, in teams, have a kind of very clear sense, this is my bread and butter. My bread and butter is working with people, it is supporting people to achieve change, it is care and protection. And so for me, it's that kind of conversation into meetings about, okay, taking the temperature. If this doesn't feel core at the moment, what's getting in the way? One of the things that people tell you whenever you do research is, oh, it's actually just really good to talk about this. And what you get a sense of is people looking for reflective spaces. So for me, the social workers are there in practice, in teams, grappling with these things every day, and it's about creating reflective spaces. Those reflective spaces can be in supervision, but actually often the positive accounts were about teams that created and recognised the value of reflective space. So that's just a very simple thing. Sometimes we talk about that as community of practice, but it's recognising the resource that's there within teams, within organisations. It's the people. It's the question that Iona answered earlier was, you know, what do we do about the inconsistency? Well, the inconsistency is going to follow people. People are inconsistent. So how do we create some of the kind of prompt structure spaces that encourage some encourage quality?
Yeah. Thank you so much. I want to finish on the question about lived experience and co-production. I'm just going to read something from online. It's put as a question, but actually, in a way, it's a comment on this, which is about mitigating against the barriers to support, particularly for newly qualifieds, from hybrid working, on the basis that there are often very high vacancies. We've got high vacancies which particularly affect newly qualified social workers in the sense that they obviously then are taking on more and different and more complex things than they might need to. And also hybrid working, where people are working at home a lot and maybe aren't in those team spaces that you're talking about physically as people to people. So thank you very much for that question online, but I'm just going to use it as a comment there because of time, but it's a really, really good point. I'd like to finish with Lewis's point about how do we sustain the profession through that lens of we work co-productively, getting alongside people. That's where is that where the reward comes? How can we just reflect on that and your thoughts on the importance of that? Yeah,
I think that's really important, actually. And it's interesting because when I was in my role and I go to different places, I'd see how varying, the different approaches to that. And in some places, people who drew on care and support from social workers and social care were involved in everything, designing forms, designing care and support plans and what they should do like for them, being part of commissioning teams, peer support workers in some of the mental health services where people who'd experienced mental health services were then part of the team. So I think you've got that one end and then at another end, barely any recognition of how you involve people. Even as far as even involving people in recruitment and selection of social workers, and in some places that was just how it was done. So I think there's a lot that can be done. There are a lot of really good examples of how people have absolutely marbled it in to every aspect of a social care, social services department, and where they're just at the foothills of it. But I think that is the key, as I said in my talk earlier, that is the key future and opportunity and challenge for us as social workers to make sure that that is how we develop and improve our profession and our practice.
Thank you. Any other comments? Yes, Anya, and then Anya, and then Iona.
No, thank you for the question. And as Lynn says, it's a really important area of practice. And equally, I would agree that when social workers are working with people with lived experience, they often find those amongst their most enriching experiences of social work. And I suppose that kind of just to mention sort of 2 initiatives within Northern Ireland on that, on that topic. So we have produced a sort of co-production and social work guidance. We call it our reflection series, but that's very much, and as you would expect, the co-production in social work was co-produced with people with kind of lived experience. So that sort of journey and putting together that guidance has been very, very enriching for all of us. The other initiative I would mention is the establishment of local engagement partnerships. We are sort of coming out the other end of a 10-year social work strategy, and that was one of the achievements of that, and that's very much within each of our 5 health and social care trusts. We have a collaborative that is about bringing social workers, people who use services, carers, community and voluntary sector, statutory sector, all together in terms of kind of shaping what it is that we all want from social work and how we can drive the profession, in that particular way.
Thank you, Anya. Iona, did you want to comment?
Yeah, I mean, some of the best services I've been involved in and I've seen have been services that have been shaped by people, with people, I worked in the drug services for more than 20 years and still remain very proud of a lot of the work that we did in Glasgow, which was really working with people with drug problems and their families and all the people who work in the service to develop a better service. And in the end, around a third of the workforce were people with lived experience. So I think it's really important in terms of, and I think that's absolutely right and appropriate, and I think it's really important in terms of involving people, working alongside people to shape services that make a real difference to them. I think what's really important though is that we ensure that there's a balance, that it's not just sometimes those who step forward fastest. It needs to be those who are furthest away as well, particularly drug users, particularly people with mental health problems sometimes, lots of other very excluded groups that we work with. But I think in terms of looking at roots into social work, it's really important that we are trying in Scotland at the moment to develop roots into social work that allow people who are that bit further away into becoming qualified social workers as well. And for me, that's a really important part of, we need a workforce which reflects the community that we work with and that we support.
Absolutely. Thank you. Yeah, really important point. We have actually run out of time, and I think I'm going to draw this session to a close. I think that I'm just going to say, just briefly on that last point, I think that one thing that really sustained me when I was in direct practice and working as a manager and director, it was my getting deeply into co-production and working with people, because it was the people-to-people relationship that really sustained me, not usually the board meetings and all that stuff, not that particularly. And I also think with the eco-social thinking, this is about people to people in all contexts, and it's a great, that being a leveller, and it's that human-to-human relationship that can become very enriching and inspirational and imaginative and creative. So just to end on that was my little point there, and to thank Aine Morrison, Iona Colvin, Lynn Romeo, Anna Radulescu, Trish Culloch, John McGowan and Jonathan Griffiths. Thank you so much for sitting on the stage and giving us your thoughts. Thank you so much. Thank you. We are now going for our break. You have half an hour before the workshops start. Thank you.